You found your way to Blood Moon Radio. I'm Coraley, and this is where we follow the threads the world wants us to drop. This is Unapologetic Alchemy, Part 2, where I sit down with Mirey Faema, registered clinical counselor, and Avery Hulbert, university instructor, as we explore what it means to be too much. Our conversation took us through shame, grief, the harm caused by hyperproductivity, and what it means to refuse to be categorized. At the end of part 1, Mirey left us with this thought.
Why are you feeling like you're not enough? Why are you feeling like that person needs to be less so that you can feel okay?
And as we continued on in our conversation, we delved into how far we've really come, the magic of being authentic, and alchemizing too much into freedom from expectation. This conversation is not the most overtly esoteric one we've had this season, but it brings us deeper into the real work of witchcraft and the function of folk magic in our society, going beyond aesthetics and performative spell work, and highlighting the value of autonomy, reclaiming personal power, advocacy, and living in right relation. Well, certainly I think there's cultural norms that push that on us, and then psychologically, how we're raised. I think most of us of a certain generation and up were raised using shame to get us to behave properly. And then I think probably the lack of equality. There's been a lack of equity while women have been told we're able to be equal now and we're climbing up doing these things. And I do think that that's the forgotten thread when we talk about feminism, is I view feminism as something that would be positive for everyone. If we were less patriarchal, I think it would be highly beneficial. It would be more accepting. It would be healthier for everyone. But men do get forgotten in this conversation. Most of the people I know who have marital problems centers around what you just talked about. Like, her expectations are too high, she's too much, this is too much. It's hard for the men to say, hey, I can't do this amount, right? Because they're doers and they feel like the expectation is they provide and can take care, and they don't know what that looks like. And they're not used to saying, I'm struggling with this, because to express emotion or to express struggling with something to them is weakness. It means something negative. Whereas to me, if my partner came to me and was talking vulnerably about something they were struggling with, I would connect with them and, appreciate that so much. But there's not a recognition of that, I think, in themselves and in society.
Agreed. I think that's exactly where we talk about how is the patriarchy in this capitalist society serving us. I think we're at that point where we're seeing the toll of it, and in a sense of it's not working for a lot of people. We're at a point right now, we look back at early humans and hunters-gatherers, and we look at traditional indigenous societies, everybody had a role. And nobody was this one size fits all. I can do it all, right? Like, even your leaders were leaders because they could mobilize and delegate and oversee things. Now we have this mentality in our structure, in our society, that we need to be the everything to everybody and to ourselves. And when people are thrust with that feeling of I need to do it all and nobody's there to help me, that's where we see this breakdown of relationships. And so I think it's like going back, and we can learn a lot about how humans have survived since time immemorial for generations and generations, and how we're seeing this breakdown now more astronomically than we've seen in our historical record. Is exactly this. Is like, wait a second, like, time out. What are we doing? Why are we running rampant? Why are we doing all this other stuff that really doesn't matter? How are we showing up in the world? Why in relationships are people feeling like a lot of conflict, like you said, both of you, is coming on down to the tit for tat. Who's doing this? Who's doing that? Humans need to work together as a team. And we're seeing that breakdown in institutional structures, in organizational structure, this concept of this superhuman that we're all trying to be. I always say, look at these cooperative societies where it's like I'm going to do this over here, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, is a lot more sustainable and more rooted in how humans have always survived versus this engine of I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do it all by myself. And then competing over who can do this impossible task by themselves. I read this book that I kind of wanted to share. It's really interesting. It's by Trisha Hershey. It's called Rest is Resistance. And this was recommended by a friend of mine, a decolonized approach on what's happening to us as humans in this capitalistic patriarchal society and how busy is valued. But she actually talks about how in her family, in the era of slavery and moving forward, the message that was always like, you resist by napping, you resist by resting. And that's how we break down the colonial structure. These societies, these, political structures, everything was built, break down individual human strength. She talks about how it's used as a tool in slavery, just run people all the way down to nothing. And I see that that's what we're doing. We're pitting against men and women or women and women and all these in these gender roles. But at the end of the day, when we strip it all back down, we need each other to survive.
I think it's I talked about this with Juliet Jarvis when she was on too. I believe that that's a core tenet of any form of abuse, creating a scenario where you're always turned on, you always have to go, you're always not doing enough. Because it messes with your nervous system. And I have a theory that it in society and in interpersonal relationships, it's there to strip you of your power. You lose your power because you lose your sense of what's right, what's wrong, what you should be doing, and also just your sense of self. I don't have to do anything to be valuable, But if someone has placed this constant, you have to be completing these things, you didn't complete them properly, there's always so much more to do and you're not getting to it on you, and you take that in, you allow it to come in as this is where my value lies, it undermines everything about you on an internal level so quickly.
And then if you're being told on the side, or okay, you're too much, and you're like, I just can't.
Cognitive dissonance is huge too.
And it's like self-harm almost. Have a fuck the list is often what I say, especially people with ADHD that I work with, because a lot of it is we're constantly creating lists, we're constantly creating tasks. We live in a society where hyperproductivity is idolized. And even when I do couples therapy with people, often it comes down to if people are seeking connection, instead of divide and conquering and trying to be hyper productive all the time, it's fold the laundry together. Just start doing things together. But it's we're always so fast paced. We have a million places to be. And it's really hard because parents are constantly forced, you're supposed to do this, and this type of parenting thing and show up in this way and have your kid in this activity, all while not having a full support system of a community, all your family members around like it used to be. So it's capitalism, hyper productivity. All of it is designed to basically work against family systems, create unhealthy families. And then the challenge is, rather than looking at this system being the problem, I even saw it recently. Imagine all the propaganda that made us believe the homemaker was a bad choice. But it's well, it's more about having the choice to be a homemaker. That should be allowed. And currently, with the cost of living and capitalism, it's not. And so now we're seeing burnt out families, and we're seeing people who don't have the choice to show up in a way that they would like to for their families. So it's almost capitalism is taking away choice, which again, feminism is trying to create a sense of choice for both genders to be able to show up in a way that makes sense for them. When we think of capitalism and hyperproductivity, that creates a lot of discourse of people never feeling good enough. And when you think of where you're too much is told to women, it's if they are actually good at being hyperproductive, or if they do put a lot of energy into things and they do have a lot of energy to share, and then you've got other people who are feeling they aren't measuring up, then they're going to use that to be you're being too much, which then usually when I work with people who have a core belief that they're too much, that also translates to therefore I'm not lovable. And if you keep people feeling not good enough and not lovable, then they're just going to keep working really hard within this system to prove their value. And for a lot of people, again, it's that value is tied to their productivity. So we're all keeping ourselves in this cycle of being low and inauthentic because the alternative is fighting against this massive system that feels incredibly difficult to change. So it's like when you're a kid and you internalize messages that you get from your parents into meaning something negative about you. I feel like we're all still stuck doing that as adults because now our parents are essentially this massive system that we can't understand or figure out how to change, even though it's not working for us.
Avery, I know you said you weren't comfortable talking about spirituality, so you can bow out of this sort of observation if you like. The podcast is very witchy, and something I found super interesting, particularly growing up in an atheist family where any religion was woo-woo and out there, and it's this hocus pocus, and this is real life. But every discussion I've had on the podcast so far, but it doesn't matter if we're talking about politics, capitalism, being a woman, interpersonal relationships, psychology, science, all ties in to things that modern day witches or like they tie in so completely with their theories about what needs to change and the advocacy that's happening. But it also ties into just the mundaneness of it, where they're not really separate. And what I find interesting about that is that when I had Monica Badirsky or Juliet Jarvis on, who are working witches, and they're discussing these magical concepts, they discuss it as life is magical, the mundane is magical. And you can see it when we're talking about the bigger theories, right? When they're talking about physics and you're tying it into these spiritual concepts from folk magic. Do you see your professions bridging into spirituality? Because spirituality is having a bit of a comeback, which is also interesting to me because academically, I think nonlinear thinking is such a huge concept. It's a huge concept in spirituality too. Like there's just so many ways they link back to each other.
Among sort of this non-categorical thinking, really pushing back where you don't fit in a box, being raised Christian and all of these things. It's a hybrid spirituality that helps make sense of the world we live in, that helps me answer the questions that I can't experience. That's where I'm finding these like-minded support networks is that people who do believe in the same sort of idea, we can't really put our finger on it, right? Like I can't say, oh, I identify as this or that, but it's something you can't, and it's very spiritual connection because it is what it is. You can't put your finger on it, but it's like a feeling. It's like these people get me, or this is making sense to me. It's explaining things that I cannot use, my reason, my logic, or anything else to make sense of. This makes me feel like things are going to be okay. And I think that that's where, for me, like I kind of bow out a lot from the formal spirituality because it is one of those very few things that is very sacred to me that I really value on not having to articulate it, but know where it is. And it's the stuff that helps me sleep at night in this big, crazy world that we live in. That's like, I'm not alone, that there are other people, and that I have this like great support network that kind of get it, that this is really complicated. And it's this most bizarre group of people that you just feel that sense of belonging. Like when I strip it down to what people look at, what religion or spirituality offers to them, it's like, I got that. There's no question about it. But how it shows up and where it is, it's not like a place. There's not like a scripture. There's not like a way of practice, but it's this whole feeling of belongingness, of this that makes sense, that tells me the world is, I'm going to be okay. I'm not alone. And that openness, I absolutely love and am completely enthralled with learning about other people's, those who are open to sharing their spirituality, because I think it's like this, it's okay to borrow and to make sense of it. And then when you grow up as a Christian, it's like, this is the way you believe. And I remember always being that kid that's saying like, but what about this? What about that? What about that? And I've raised my kids like, of course you have a spiritual belief, you have belief systems and things, but it's not something that you don't have to identify that. You don't have to fit yourself into a box. That's the one thing that I give myself the freedom to not have to fit into a box. And maybe it's because that's the one thing I don't want anyone to take away from me or to break down. I feel like if I can name it, if I can say I am this, then that's one more way people can attack me or say you're not enough. Whereas this is the one way that I'm like, I'm enough because this works for me. No one can tell me that you're too little, you're too much, you're too there. It's like, it is honestly the compass that keeps me floating and moving one step in front of the other, that we're going to be okay.
And I resonate with that. When I think of it from a therapeutic standpoint, I'm in with people talking all day, and you can feel the energy. If someone's really anxious and they're not expressing it, I will start to feel that anxiety. You can read the body language, you can feel the energy shift in the room. And that's how we do co regulate each other. But it sounds like a lot of what you're speaking about, spirituality, a faith of some sort, has a big proponent of healthy mind, like, and for mental health and being important, because it can create hope, a sense of belonging. It can make sense of the world that we live in. But when you think about it, what you're talking about, community, is always going to be at the forefront. And that was traditionally what a lot of like churches and religious groups were designed to do, is create a sense of community for people. So when I always think about it, it's very much like, what is it that gives you that sense of community? What others natural supports? And for some people, it is being out in nature. For some people, it's finding all the people that they connect with the most. And when I relate it back to being too much, it's very much, maybe you're just in the wrong room if people feel you're too much. So when I work with a lot of actually women who are like, I'm too much. And I see a lot with women who are late diagnosis ADHD, like myself, which is very much feeling constantly misunderstood, a constant theme of being misunderstood. And it's, are you not understood, or are you just in the wrong room? Maybe you've got to find where is the right room for you to be in, where you connect with people. And I have noticed for myself, a lot of my friends who are also a similar age, who I'm like, I think you have ADHD too. And they're like, every time you mention what you experience, that's me too. And I'm like, well, it makes sense. We've found each other because our brains work in a similar way. So we understand each other. We can handle each other without getting overwhelmed. We can talk at each other all day and not think it's rude. All of the traits that we have work well together, because I'm like, I'm not going to be offended when you don't message me for 3 days. I'm not going to be offended when we're interrupting each other, where we're maybe not even listening anymore and talking over each other. I'm not going to be upset when you relate to everything I say with a story, because that's how you relate. These are our traits, and it's how we connect, and that's why we found each other.
Quick question for you then, Mirey, because I'm really grappling with this as well, as a woman who's been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder as well as ADHD.
Mhm.
It's really interesting to see that, wait a second, is this actually something wrong with me? I'm reading this book right now called ADHD is Awesome.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I find that us individuals with ADHD generally have a really great sense of humor. I find this book is really helpful because it's creating that, like, almost that tongue in cheek. Is like, man, your life would be boring without
Yeah.
us. And that's where I think a lot of the too much comes, is the woman trying to live with having to be medicated because my anxious, worry thoughts consume a lot, especially when they're showing up in the world and in that interactions, and then a layer of ADHD on top. But then is this also an adaptive way as to how we show up in the world as women, in a sense of, is it actually a diagnosis that we're seeing more because this is what we're doing with people may feel are too much? Or are we creating a space where we can identify that we can feel like we belong and find like-minded people?
Yeah, so they're doing more and more studies to show that brain spectrum, the way that we operate, a lot of these traits can really be seen all the way back to like hunter-gatherer times. Where I look at it as, the only reason I really see it as a diagnosis, again, is because of the structure of the world that we live in. The world is structured for a specific way of operating and a specific way of functioning in the world. And so, because of that, it then creates disabilities and challenges for people who don't fit in a similar way that it's like, if all of our buildings were wheelchair accessible and just all built so every room and bathroom and everything had that capacity, and we could all move in a wheelchair if needed, then it would just be, you're either in a wheelchair or you're not, right? And so when I look at ADHD, I've been fortunate enough that I've always just kind of rolled to the beat of my own drum. So I created systems for myself, and I work like 1 till 8 because I can't trust my sleep and I can't trust my brain to function before a certain time. Not a lot of people have that luxury, right? So then they have a whole lifetime of trying to fit into a box that wasn't designed for them to be in. I think that's where it becomes a challenge. And again, it's on a spectrum. Like some people have such severe symptoms with it, with like anxiety and depression and pieces like that, where it is like creating systems alone is not enough. And sometimes medication can really help balance that out and the emotional regulation. And that social burnout, like for me, the reason I went on medication and actually pursued the diagnosis was because they don't tell you another thing of women's health with perimenopause and menopause, it starts to get a lot worse. And I started to notice my
Yes.
ability to function at work and then have a life outside of work became really difficult. And my burnout rates were faster because the energy is very up and down. And so I find it really kind of life changing for balancing out my energy and my emotional regulation now that it's getting even harder. For the most part, I do think for a lot of people, the real issue is the structure not being inclusive for how we're expected to show up to work, for our working hours, for business hours, for how people are meant to manage their day to day. A lot of that doesn't make sense for people that have different brain function.
I mean, I'm neurotypical, but I have CPTSD, and then executive function is currently not great. And so I can relate to my ADHD friends a lot because I have a slightly higher than normal IQ. I'm used to being very academic, like being able to organize a ton of thoughts, and my brain works in a way where I draw, similarities or conclusions and into a myriad of things, and not being able to organize all that is not great, But to my way of thinking and I observe a lot, and I always have different ways of thinking, things that we call non-neurotypical, they're very necessary in society. We need people who think differently. Catherine Bell was on. She is the founder of the Awaken Company. She trains, millionaire businesses, billionaire businesses to be better at business. And she talks about the importance of diversity in teams all the time, because you can't have a group of people that just think the same and do well. It doesn't work. Yeah. Right? You need differences in thought, people who can see things differently, people who think if we were working like we talked about in a community better, you would have people that worked at different times. And Juliet Jarvis and I also talked about this when we're talking about building businesses, because we're both building businesses right now and thinking about it in a less patriarchal, less capitalism centered, less how we do things in North America way, looking at matrilineal systems, or working around other people's schedules, around their health, so that they can have a work-life balance, which I don't think is just beneficial for people who have brains that function differently, who are able to see things in a different way or need a different environment to do it. I think it's beneficial to everyone. Think about how much less stressful it would be if you were able to not be at work from this set amount of time and do the things that you need to do. Or if you were, like Mirey has built a life where she can work in the hours that work for her. If everybody were able to do that, we would all function better. We would all be healthier, happier. Mentally, I think the load would come off quite a bit.
There'll allow space for people to do what they're passionate about. I think there's always this fear that people will stop working or be unproductive or take advantage of that, where of course some people will. That's how society works. But for the most part, it does breed loyalty, more connection. People feel valued. They are more passionate about the work. They feel like a bigger part of a team. And work can bring a lot more satisfaction when people feel cared about in the workplace.
I think it's also so ingrained in us to view things that you like doing, unless it fits a certain box, as not work. So I created the podcast at probably the darkest time of my life, knowing that I had to figure out what I needed to do to get motivated, because I have 3 children that need me. And this is an idea that I had, and I thought about doing it right when I left my husband. But there was that little voice in my head saying, that's not real work, And I felt that every step of the way. But I've built a whole business. I've built my systems. I've made, the website. I figured out my potential income streams and front loaded it so that they're there. I've built two stores, the digital store, the physical product store, it's a business. But in my head, I'm like, oh, you're just talking to people and doing these things that you like because that's the voice of society. That's not a real job. That should be your hobby. You should go get a job where you're working for someone else. That's what counts. I think we underestimate how much our inner voice is affected by what we've been told our whole lives growing up about those things. And I think, Mirey, you're right. If people are able to do jobs that they feel fulfilled by, they work harder. Catherine Bell talked about that too. She thinks that the future of business and work is actually allowing people to come in more on a contractor level so that they can be specialized in what they're good at. They can come in and work for you in that while you need it and be free to go continue to do that and have their whole career be doing the things that they're good at and that they like. And that's within their autonomy. But I do think we're so set in the idea of being controlled, and the systems are so set up to control us that that's a far off change. I could be wrong, but there's so much pushback to so much resistance to doing things differently.
Well, and I see it as well. And thinking of the too much woman, I've always been in a career that I'm passionate about because the fun thing about my brain is it will not allow me to last very long in something that I don't like. So if I have no interest in it, I'm out, which is kind of what I think is a superpower of ADHD. It forces you to passion and it forces you to be authentic. It's like the way my brain works. It doesn't allow me to be anybody else. And even if I try, it doesn't last very long. With that comes, though, being thought of as too much because my job is my passion. I get hyper fixated on learning about it. I could talk about mental health till I pass out. Sometimes people really enjoy that in a social setting. Other times people are just like, you're too much. We don't want to talk about these heavy topics. We don't want to always be caring about this stuff. Or I get comments like, maybe you should take a break from it. Or if I'm going through something, even though I know to put all the supports in place because I have to make sure that I'm taken care of so that I can continue to work, I'll get, maybe you should just leave counseling for a while until you recover. Because I think so many people aren't used to working in their passion that they see me talking about it or me going to work when I'm sad as it must be horrible, or I'm obsessed with work, or I don't have boundaries around work, or, I'm taking on my work or taking it home when I'm like, no, for me, it's just really exciting to talk about. I love learning about it. It's my hobby and it's my passion. And if I'm sad and I'm having a hard time going to work and being with my clients is beneficial to me, I feel better. I thrive off it. It helps me regulate. It's really something that I really just love being able to do. And of course, there's days where you're going to need your own mental health day and you take it. And there's times you just don't want to go to work like everybody else or you need a vacation. But for the most part, I'm talking about it because I love it and I get to do what I love. And it took me a long time to realize like a lot of the judgments on how I was with my work or the way that I am with mental health was because so many people, they go to work, they do it to survive. They don't enjoy it. They don't like the company they work with. They don't feel connected to it. So they can't understand why I'm so obsessed with it, essentially.
I think that's true though. Like when we're struggling in so many aspects and juggling so much as women in this society, that having to show up for a job that is just further draining you, it's harder. Like how many times have I been told, suck it up? Who cares? Like nobody loves their job. And I'm like, yeah, but
I think you should.
When you have
You
to,
should love your job.
you have to show up
Such a
in
big chunk
so
of your
many
life.
other ways. It is, right? So I think that's that big thing where what we're seeing in this structure right now in our world is that we don't matter anymore. Everybody's replaceable. And this idea is that, okay, next, right? Is really hard when you're putting everything into it. And it does mean a lot to you. And then organizational structure is just being like, yeah, we'll just find someone else.
I wonder if we then look at the concept of too much woman as actually just being whole, if what we're talking about right now is one of the ways to begin to normalize it being wholeness, at least in work. I don't know if it speaks to in relationships or communities, but
I think for me, it's definitely something that I accept and I have to work to not feel bad about it. It's part of my identity is that I am a lot. I'm too much woman, I'm too much mom, I'm too much, lots of different roles. But there's people that show up that like that they expect that they need that, or that I need that. I feel like there's already so many limitations in the world. And I feel that if I then have to worry about dialing it down to make other people comfortable, it's exhausting and it's sometimes too hard. Those are the days where I find the hardest, where I have to be on my quote best behavior, because I'm spending so much of that energy being used, where it's natural for me to just like show up, kind of light up a room. My emotions are on my sleeve, but you always know where you're at with me. And yeah, it may am too much. And the fact that I'm a woman, would I still be too much man? I don't think so. And the amount of work and therapy I've had to do to be like, how do we take up less space? And then we've got to the point of my therapist, it's like, you know what? It's not my job to make other people feel more comfortable in this world. I'm not going to apologize anymore. If it's working for me, then that's what's the most critical thing. Am I sleeping at night because of it? Well, sometimes I'm not, because sometimes I lie there being like, oh my gosh, what did I say? What did I do? Like, how can I redo this? Why did I do that? I was just too much. I should have just let it go. But I think that's kind of where I'm at professionally, personally, raising the next generation. What's my legacy? And if I'm showing up too much and I'm too much woman, especially if it's too much woman, that's someone else's problem. That's not mine. And it's a gift to be able to hold people responsible or accountable without really even doing anything or making other people uncomfortable. I come from a place of kindness and love and respect. And especially in my relationship as an educator, if you feel like I've made you uncomfortable or anything like that, I'll accept full responsibility, but you gotta tell me so that we can repair that relationship, make it right. Because I am a lot.
Yeah.
But I never come at it from a place of meanness ever. So if I'm too much, let's have a conversation, but please know that I'm not being mean.
I feel the same. When I think of when people have that belief, it can be really ingrained, right? As women are just socialized differently, it starts at a really young age. And it often, where I see it start is if you're a very emotional child, which a lot of children are, but you have parents, whether it's culturally or just the way they were raised, who aren't comfortable with the full range of emotions, which I think is a societal issue we're facing now that we live more closed off. It used to be you would live in colonies where everyone was close. You could hear each other do everything. Everybody could hear every emotion. It was normalized. Now everything but positivity is hidden.
Yes.
A lot of the undoing comes from either reprocessing. I do EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So for a lot of people, it really is like reprocessing some of those core beliefs and core memories and experiences to create a new belief about yourself of like, you are lovable, you're good enough as is. But I do feel like we are just in a difficult time in society. So I do notice for myself when it comes to dating, still being single, there is a sacrifice. If I'm not willing to mute or tone it down or lure them in first before I reveal the whole thing, people get scared off pretty quick. I like it now because I'm like, the benefit is I'm not wasting my time, but I will still have friends be like, you can't write that. You can't send that. And I'm like, the right person thinks it's hilarious. And I do meet people that think it's hilarious. Like, yeah, you do make sacrifices. There is an element where it's like, I get told like to read a room. Like there is an element of social conduct of also trying to show up and see where people are at, which sometimes I miss the mark. But I think a lot of it really is that same thing of a lot of therapy to really work on not assuming what people are thinking or feeling and allowing people to tell me, what are the facts here? If no one is telling me, I can't be different. But again, if somebody tells me I've done something that's upset them, I'll take accountability for that and I'll try to fix it.
Yeah.
And it is really hard. And I think this is where the difficult part is because a lot of people aren't comfortable with having boundaries or stating needs, particularly women. For a long time, I had mostly like male friends for the fact that they're so blunt. And now I have a lot of women friendships that I really enjoy, but I do have to check in more because women are socialized not to speak up or state their needs or tell you when they've been hurt, or we are raised to be more conflict avoidant. And so I'm always like, let out the rage, let out the hurt, express yourself, because there's direct correlations between not expressing yourself out of fear of being too much and then becoming a people pleaser and then being more susceptible to autoimmune diseases and other issues, because we always forget that our brain and our body is one. It's not separate. So our emotions get stored. But it is really hard to trust that people are going to let you know so you can rectify it, so that you don't have to be on guard all of the time trying to manage your own personality.
I think what I'm hearing both of you say, like in relation to how do we get to viewing being too much as being whole, is really authenticity and connection, which are two things that we've talked about pretty much the whole discussion, right? I did pull 3 tarot cards. So the first one I pulled is the 5 of Pentacles, which I was kind of surprised by. Pentacles are physical, often associated with money. This one's about loss, but generally it's more relates to like a fear of. The second card that I pulled was the 8 of Cups. Cups are emotion. And this is about departure, travel, or a journey. Like you can see the ship there. The last card that I pulled is the Knight of Pentacles. I love this deck. And the Knight of Pentacles is about wisdom and effort. And the way I kind of read the reading was, you know, the idea of the too much woman and everything that it carries is a bit of a fear. And it carries the weight of the possibility of losing ourselves too. You have to lose yourself to fit in. And I think the journey is about finding like that internal wisdom, finding the connection and the authenticity. That's how I took the reading. Does any of that resonate with you guys? Or
I think the fear, right?
Absolutely.
It's like, yeah, it's a fear of, I find when I think of the fear, it's definitely a fear of what you might lose, or the fear of being unlovable if you go on the journey to be authentically yourself, because we are in such a weird state in society where there is this big shift happening, and a lot of people are having to unlearn, and a lot of people are having to do some really deep core work. And in that, in coming into your own authenticity, you do end up losing connections almost at the same frequency that you make new ones. So it's a really turbulent journey.
My definitely for the fear, the first thing that comes to mind is that fear of hurting others, which is core to my orientation as a beautiful Enneagram iconic 2. Is an idea of like, if someone's like too much woman, I'm like, okay, who am I hurting? Right? Like, need to change myself because I'm reading that room wrong, or I've responded wrong. I'm too much. And you said about the journey, Coraley, that was, to me, journeys are always exhausting. As a survivor of violent abuse, it's exhausting. Healing journeys, everything. So I have that orientation for me whenever I hear the word journey, even though I'm trying to like personally rebrand it, I'm so stuck in the trenches of, oh, whoa, here we go again. It's going to be a long one. And I think that this life work, like, to me, is that, you know, it's a blessing, but it's also maybe sometimes a curse, is, you know, this having to be too much woman, where if I wasn't a woman, I would probably be a great man. I don't know.
so true.
I wish I had a penis and I could just live my life the way that I wanted, and I didn't give a shit. My husband and I talk about that all the time, and with my daughter we talk about the penis factor. Anyways, that's the humor.
Well, I imagine there's a lot of fear for also women who are not yet there, where they feel like they're not able to authentically lean into being too much. When I hear those cards, because it is a really long journey. I feel like I've done 10 years of therapy, and now I'm a therapist myself, and I'm still doing the journey. There's still moments that you lie awake at night and you're like, what did I say? How did I show up? Or you show up and you know that it was probably actually a little much, or you're like, maybe I was a bit harsh, or maybe I didn't think before I spoke and that wasn't great. And it's this constant learning journey and figuring out how to communicate better and be authentic while still being caring. And it's so much work. And I can, even when I think sometimes I wish that I was a man, and I remember up until the age of 5, I was convinced I was a little boy and not a girl because I wanted to be like my dad. There's often times where I wish that I was a woman that fit in the box. Life would have been so much easier if I just wanted to get married, live in suburbia, have a family, and just be very chill and quiet, and not this person that was constantly pushing boundaries or disagreeing with people. And not to say that women like that aren't authentic, because I think that's people's personalities as well. And like, it would be just so nice to be a woman with a different type of personality that isn't considered too much.
Yeah.
I sometimes crave that because it feels like it would be easier.
What advice or affirmation would you guys offer to women listening who still feel like they need to shrink to be accepted?
Mine is to find like-minded people. And I think also to do your own work. I think one thing I really took away today from listening to Mirey was that self-work, that perspective of it's my interpretation of the world I live in. So if I'm feeling insulted by somebody saying that, then what does that mean for me? So not worry so much about what is happening around you, but what's happening within you. And is being too much something that you're proud of, then run with it, girl. But if you're feeling like you don't like it, then you have to do that work inside. If it hurts you and cuts you like a knife, you have to do that work inside and figure out where's that perspective. Where do you find that alignment within yourself? That's the key thing that I coming away with more confidence, looking at why we respond to things a certain way and being confident with our decisions and trusting ourselves. Some things are worth it. Sometimes people around us, if you're around the right people, they'll be like, you know what? This one's not really worth it. I always go back to the subtle art of not giving a fuck. Is it worth a fuck or is it not worth a fuck? I only have X amount of fucks and I don't know how many I got. So is this worthy enough that I'm going to give you a fuck? Then yeah, I'm going to follow this through. And those are the situations where I find that I'm really a lot, and that's okay, because it's worth it. But it has to feel right within yourself. Another thing that I learned as someone who's very worried about what other people think, that's part of how I see the world and part of my insecurities. A lot of people don't even notice me. So maybe it is a compliment when I'm too much. And I think it's just doing our own work, trust your gut, and just be strong. People are always going to have something to say, and most people actually have nothing to say. So don't live your life in the shadows worried to show up.
Yeah. And I would say, to kind of add to that, everybody's going to have their own journey and their own perspective. What are your priorities? What makes sense for you? In some situations, it may feel like the benefit of shrinking outweighs the cons of not being able to be your true self. And sometimes that is a safety piece. Sometimes it is a comfortability. But again, most people are so busy thinking about how they're showing up, they are not worrying about you. I'll have like 20 hours of clients a week, and all their worry is how they're showing up rather than what everybody else is doing in the room. And so it's like constantly reminding yourself, if you're constantly worried about how you're showing up, most people are probably not noticing because they're also so busy worrying about themselves and how they're showing up.
Yeah.
So doing that work to create more balanced thoughts and really figure out what makes sense for you. Where is your comfortability level? Understanding that it's not your fault if you feel this way, because there are so many social and cultural influences that create this. However, it is your responsibility to adjust as your own mind and your own thoughts about it. And the only person that can do that work is you. And it's really hard and it's a long journey, and it can be really worse before it gets better. You can almost become hyper aware. But the long-term benefit is ideally getting to a place where you feel happier and healthier and can regulate yourself more easily, and can, when you have a moment of worry, you can balance that thought out with the facts, or be like, maybe people liked that I was like that,
Yeah.
as opposed to always putting yourself down to make yourself stay small.
Yeah. And silence doesn't always mean rejection. Silence can really mean resonation. Sometimes I think what I find so isolating is when I am like too much or just show up and I wonder where everybody else is. I always wish that there would be the people who come up afterwards and are like, oh my gosh. I just wish other people would also exercise that courage. It's to just not be afraid. And welcome to the Too Much Club. We're always accepting new members. And I feel like I owe it to the women before me who have made it so much easier to be in this world. The fact that I can work in a male dominated field and I can move up. The fact that when I speak up, people listen to me, regardless of that I self-identify as a woman, that I can be a change maker in this world. I think I do owe it to keep that momentum going forward too. If that is what's on my tomb and that's what in my obituary is, that Avery, the woman who showed up and was always a lot, I'm going to take that.
When it is to take the pros with the cons. When you're having a hard time, I will be too much in your face trying to support you. You can take that with the other times where I'm being very emotional or showing up in a way that's maybe a little too much of something that feels hard to deal with. Kind of take the good with the bad. And also thinking just while you're talking that this conversation, when we were talking about different social structures, the outcome or the way we would get to it or how it would look would probably be different too. If we did have more voices in the room, people of color may have a totally different perspective on what it means to be too much. You know, the angry Black woman and different tropes like that, where it's like sometimes for people to authentically show up as themselves, it's not as safe. And so recognizing that privilege of when you're not in an abusive relationship, when you are in a safe space, when you have supports and you have friends that love you, it's much easier to be too much authentically.
Yeah.
My last question is kind of fun, but before I get to it, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you guys want to talk about, or anything that you're working on that you want to share? Anything that we may have missed?
I have a
Right.
grief group that I run in Fernie. It's every second Thursday. It's with the Elk Valley Suicide Task Force. And the reason I feel that's relevant is because grief, especially in Western culture, has been really, really boxed up. People feel too much very frequently when they're grieving, and they feel like no one wants to be around them. No one wants to mention it. No one wants to see it. Grief is where people commonly will gaslight themselves into being less.
Grief is a huge thing this season in the podcast because it was born out of a place of grief. So I had so much all at once. It was overwhelming. I don't feel like in North America, in our society, we're good at, people think at the funeral, if it's a death, first of all, we only really allow people to grieve when we're talking about like death. We're not like, oh, you lost your job, or oh, you had a relationship, oh, you and that person aren't friends. You know, we minimize every other form, and they're all impactful, especially if you are someone who feels deeply, but more importantly, someone who's done enough healing work to actually value connections, because losing a job, for example, is not just losing a job. It's often losing the people that you were close to in that scenario too, right? But we're terrible for just being like, first, you should only grieve if it's a death, and then the funeral happened, it's over. You're good, move on with your life. It's mind-boggling to me.
I think, yeah, grief is such a complex emotion that I think is a lot of the issues that we're seeing right now with people's, I guess, lack or difference in coping is based in grief. Like, we need to start, if I was always to pick one thing that we needed to really change in our society, it would be around talking about grief. We don't even have a vocabulary to talk about it. It's something that has been completely removed from our culture. And yeah, we just don't have the vocabulary to talk about it or what to do. Show up at casseroles, but beyond that. The last thing I wanted to add, Coraley, was just around one pattern we've seen through society, looking at where we've come from. Too much women were always criminalized or deviant in society. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like we've come a long way, but we really have. I sometimes think we get caught up in the, oh my gosh, this is so hard. It is, but we've come from a place where a woman deciding that she wants to use her body and the demand of male sexual interactions as being criminalized to being decriminalized. All of these different things as to how women have shown up in society and breaking through those gender roles have been criminalized or deviant. And now we're at a point these things are being accepted, and that being too much woman is not criminalized. It may still be deviant, but you are going to find those groups. And so that's why it is important to maintain this and not shrivel up, because we don't, especially at this time, we do not want to lose those. Looking back at why it is important that we continue to show up, there has been growth and progress. Are fighting to keep our girls and our women and everybody else in the world safe.
I have so much to say on the topic of human sexuality, especially being single. I'll have both of you back for another episode where we can delve into the psychology of it. If too much were a spell instead of a slur, what would it call in?
Let's say authenticity and admiration. When I think of a person that I dated that was really comfortable with my energy and really comfortable with me, like being a dreamer, being super impulsive, being all of the things that I am. He enjoyed that. He was more quiet. He liked the balance and he admired it. That was a really nice shift to allow me to be all the things without feeling worried or feeling like I would be rejected. I think being admired or even just giving that permission to other people to also be authentic. So it's like that contagious, like just be yourself, whether that's quiet, whether that's loud, knowing that who you are isn't something we have to always be ashamed of or change.
Mine is actually inviting, inspiring. It's like that brush of fresh air. She's a lot and I like it. And there's always freedom that comes with it. Being too much woman is freedom. That is something that would have been punished or would have had you hung as a witch. Now it's the freedom to be in company of a lot of inspiring, incredible other women.
As always, thank you so much for listening. Blood Moon Radio is an indie pod, so your support has a huge impact on the project, and we're always so happy to have you here with us. If you'd like more information on it, Mirey's grief group will be linked in the reading room at www.bloodmoonradio.com. And until next time, remember, the truth echoes louder after dark. Whispered, unfiltered, waiting to be touched. See you soon.